Turning to our second panel discussion of the morning. In this panel, we're going to try to gather the patient perspective on participating in clinical trials for mitochondrial disease, as well as the perspective of study coordinators who work very closely with the patients during the clinical trials. Our first panelist this morning is Monica Chulewicz from New York. And she is an adult affected by mitochondrial disease. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with mitochondrial disease.
So I'm 29 now. I've had mito since I was pretty young. I'd say like childhood, but I developed ptosis when I was 11, so that was an obvious point of when I had it. I have CPEO plus, that's leaning towards Kearns-Sayre syndrome at this point. I was diagnosed with a southern blot back in 2010, which found the large single deletion in my mitochondrial DNA.
Great, yeah, and then I assume there was some follow-up genetic testing that took place just to confirm the diagnosis.
Yeah, it wasn't until like several years later, but once the southern blot confirmed it, then, with all like the criteria that I met and everything was,
right.
Yeah.
So how did you come to be involved in a clinical trial for mitochondrial disease? Was your physician present the opportunity to you? Did you find out about it another way?
So yeah, I go to Columbia for all my care. I see Dr. Hirano there amongst a lot of different specialists, but Dr. Hirano is the one that brought it up to me. I know back in 2018, we tried to get me enrolled into the Elmeprotide trial, but at the time, they needed more genetic information, and I never had a muscle biopsy. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until end of March of 2019 that I was finally able to start the trial.
Right. Were you excited to participate in clinical research?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. I think we all have that shared goal, right, of finding treatments and cures for patients like you.
Yeah.
So what about starting the trial or participating in the trial? Was it burdensome to you? It doesn't sound like travel necessarily would be burdensome, but just tell our audience today a little bit about your experience during the trial.
Yeah, I had a really good experience with it. There was nothing that I really found any issues with when I was, whether it's travel or just spending time at Columbia. I'm there all the time anyway. But the trial itself, I really did have a good experience with everyone that I worked with there.
Do you feel like you benefited from being seen more frequently because you were participating in a trial, because your healthcare providers, Dr. Hirano and his team, were seeing you more often? Was that of benefit to you?
I don't know if it was, it was definitely a benefit, but it wasn't really that much different than the care that I already get there, because I'm honestly, before the pandemic and everything, I was going to Columbia several times a month. So it wasn't any different in that kind of sense.
Right.
But I was seeing Dr. Hirano more often,
right.
Rather than every few months or so.
Mm-hmm. And the design of the trial, do you feel like the outcome measures were representative of sort of mitochondrial disease for you and what your experience was? Is it a good way to measure the disease for you, the progress of the disease?
So, we know that the Elmeprotide trial was discontinued because the endpoints weren't met. Mm-hmm. But I think that just in the benefits that I experienced, and I know a lot of other people that I've spoken to, that friends that were in it too, that felt some of the experiences, the benefits. I know for me, with my pigmentary retinopathy, it actually, with my night blindness, it reversed that. So I was actually able to see more in the dark, which is unheard of for me because I haven't for so many years. But that wasn't like an endpoint or anything like that. So I think it might be difficult, I know, with clinical trials starting out, having a broader range maybe, because there's so many different, with elmepretide, it was a primary mitochondrial myopathy that was, it was geared to, but there's so many of those, under that umbrella.
Right. Yeah, it's a very broad description. So I guess the opportunity to have more assessments, a broader set of assessments, that's something that even from a patient who has to participate in it might have to do more testing would be okay with you. You'd be willing to invest more of your time in the effort to participate that way.
Oh yeah, of course. Because it's like, even like with the pigmentary retinopathy, we didn't, there wasn't a test or a value that we were really looking at. And I'm not sure, I get ERGs done every year, and I'm not sure at what rate the benefit was. Because if I were to do it, like, let's say an ERG during the trial, it might have been better than the one before it.
Right. Well, let's talk for a couple minutes about your experience as the trial was ending and after the trial. As a patient participating in the trial, were you satisfied with the communication that took place, how you found out about the results of the trial, that aspect of it?
Yeah, so I know with the trial itself, like when the end of December that it was announced that the endpoints were met, it wasn't discontinued quite yet. I didn't necessarily find out from like the study site per se. I found out just through being in the mito community that was sharing it. And then as far as discontinuing it, it was actually, oddly enough, I had a follow-up appointment that day for the trial. And I was leaving on the train ride home. I had the medication and everything with me. And I got an email on my way home that it was discontinued.
I'm sure that was a disappointment for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel like coming into the trial, you had a good sense or that it was presented fairly to you, that it's research and that research sometimes doesn't, go exactly as we hope for it to go.
Right.
Do you feel like that was managed in terms of expectations well for you?
Yeah, I think it was communicated pretty well. I was going into the trial, was very hopeful about it being, presented, with the FDA and everything and being eventually approved. But I knew, in the beginning that is a possibility that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Right. So just like knowing trials in general, I knew that was an option, but I wasn't like shielded from that or anything during my experience in the trial. Like I knew it was, a possibility.
Right. All right. Well, maybe just to put a wrap on this discussion, what would you like to share about your experience, your hopes for the future, or maybe any thoughts you might have that you want to share with other mitochondrial disease patients about participating in clinical research?
Yeah, I would encourage others to definitely participate, whether it's research studies or clinical trials and things like that. It's very important, especially with, the mitochondrial disease community and like all the research and everything just kind of constantly evolving as medicine does. And it's very beneficial for, not just us personally, but just the community as a whole. I know a lot of people, going in, like before they even start anything or even consider it, they think it's like, oh, I'll be a lab rat or something like that. But I had nothing, that kind of feeling throughout the whole clinical trial that I was in or any of the research studies that I've been in previously.
Right. Well, I'm pleased to hear that it was overall a positive experience for you, even if the outcome wasn't what we all hoped for, right, as the trial began. Thank you so much for sharing some of your story today, Monica. And of course, we wish you the best, all the best going forward.
Thank you.
All right, our next panelist is Michael Hall from Colorado. Michael is the father of 8-year-old Nina Hall, who is affected with mitochondrial disease. And Michael's gonna help us understand today the caregiver, the guardian perspective for a pediatric patient taking place or participating in a mitochondrial disease clinical trial. Michael, I'm so glad you could be here today. Thank you very much for doing this.
Happy to join. Happy to help.
Yeah, so just tell us a little bit about your family's journey with mitochondrial disease and for Nina.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the early days of it were filled with a lot of uncertainty. Probably 6 months or so of trying to establish, what we were dealing with. After about a year of normal progression, Nina started losing some skills, and we quickly found ourselves on the diagnostic journey, including one misdiagnosis, but eventually a second opinion that pointed us to Lee's syndrome, which is what Nina has. And we quickly got a genetic confirmation of that, and then did our best actually to aggressively get into the then ongoing epi trial that was that still had a few open slots, and so we very quickly, really ever since she's about 1.5, have been in the trial, and that's been a big part of our experience with her mitochondrial disease and navigating all that comes with that.
So how did you become aware of the trial? Was it from your healthcare provider?
It was actually at our I think 2 weeks after we got maybe even the week we got a muscle biopsy that was a confirmation of her disease. Our doctors here locally in Colorado mentioned that the UMDF had a symposium out in California, and so we rapidly got on an airplane and went to that, and heard about the trial while we were there, and started trying to network with the doctors that were there at the conference.
Yeah, that's good. It's great to hear. Of course, that's exactly what we aim to accomplish with our annual symposium, is bringing patient families together with the researchers and clinicians and sharing that kind of important information. Yeah. So once in the trial, talk a little bit about that experience. And here I'm almost asking you to wear two hats. What do you think the experience was like for Nina as she moved through the trial, but also for you and your wife Amy as caregivers of a child participating in a clinical trial?
Sure. I think for certainly for us, I can speak much more easily. Nina's somewhat nonverbal, so we have to interpret as best we can. For our experience, which I imagine hers is paralleled, early on there was a whole lot of hope, probably with then a period of uncertainty, maybe a little frustration, and then we've kind of found ourselves in a rhythm now where it's just kind of part of our life, frankly, and still a lot of hope underlying all of it.
Of course.
But I think early on, we probably had maybe some too high of expectations as to what the drug could maybe do for Nina. Mm-hmm. But it certainly seems to have helped stabilize her condition. I think one of the bigger parts of just the logistics of the trial have been a big challenge for both us and Amy, or myself and Amy, as well as clearly for Nina. Our trial site is in California. We live in Colorado, so the logistics of the trial have been a big challenge. When we were doing quarterly visits, now it's semi-annual. Well, it was pre-COVID semi-annual,
right?
And now we'll see when we go out next. But that was a big burden, frankly, over a long period of time, but one we were happy to take given the opportunity to be in the trial.
Sure.
And we never had any sort of adverse reactions with the drug or anything along those lines. And the people that we've been involved with have been great
Right.
out in California.
So the drug aside, do you feel like Nina's health benefited from being by participating in a clinical trial because of that sort of standard, regular oversight from clinicians?
I think so. Yeah, and we in talking about this and getting ready for this discussion, that was one of the things we thought of that certainly has been a benefit is just broadening our Nina's care, having more clinicians working with her on a more regular basis,
Right.
more opinions on her state and her trajectory. Certainly, I think it's helped her care, and it's also helped our mental well-being, frankly.
Right, right. Which, again, from that caregiver perspective is so important too, right? You have to give care to this child in addition to making sure that they're participating in the clinical research rate in some way. That's a lot to ask.
Yeah.
So of course, this is unfortunately another example of a trial that didn't yield the outcome that we all would have hoped for of an approved therapy. Yep. It sounds like you've been able to stay on the drug in some open label extension.
Yeah, that's right. We've continued to be on the drug, and as best we understand, we'll continue to be on the drug.
And how do you feel like the results of the trial or the progress of the drug, has that been shared with you in a meaningful way that you have a sense of where things are and how they're progressing?
I'd say yes and no. We've had to kind of pull a little bit to get that information over the course of the trial. Certainly, there's never been any pushback when we pull,
Right.
But yeah, it could have probably been more readily made available on a regular basis. But the information was out there, and we were able to get it.
Great. Well, Michael, there's so much more we could talk about, limited on time today. What would be sort of the key takeaway for you that you would want to share with other parents, guardians, caregivers of children affected by mitochondrial disease with respect to participating in clinical research towards that goal of developing treatments and cures?
Our mindset has been, particularly as we learned that there were limited treatments to begin with when we started this journey, our mindset has been, and we would encourage others to view it as, these are very important opportunities to take advantage of, not only for Nina's sake, but for the future generations of children that will be affected with these diseases. And so I think it's super important to within your own comfort range, take part in whatever is available and what seems most promising. I wouldn't be overly daunted by the travel. It's certainly a lot to bear, but the company was very accommodative, and we just view it as the least we could do, honestly, to help the community, and certainly we think been helpful for Nina, but. It's going to be an individual decision for every family, obviously, but, we would certainly recommend others if they were to approach us with any sort of questions, recommend others to take the opportunity if it's presented.
Great. Well, again, Michael, thank you so much for the comments. Best to Amy and of course to Nina, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
So for the final portion of this panel discussion, I'm joined by two study coordinators from the University of California, San Diego, Lilly and Jessica Reit, and a study coordinator from Columbia University, Chris Engelstad. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. I'm just going to start out by asking each of you to briefly introduce yourself and your experience with mitochondrial disease patients in the context of clinical trials. And Lilly, I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Lilly. I'm the clinical trials coordinator for Dr. Richard Haas at UC San Diego. And I've worked with Dr. Haas for about 5 years now on a variety of different mitochondrial disease trials, both adult and pediatric. And it's just been a wonderful time getting to learn more about the disease and spread awareness and get to know the UMDF folks.
Great, thank you. Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica. I work also at UCSD. I work with Dr. Haas, but I also work with other pediatric neurologists and researchers within neurosciences on other rare disease projects, including pediatric and adult studies.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I work with Dr. Michio Hirano at Columbia University. I have worn many hats, from being a study coordinator to now I'm managing clinical trials. And I'm also a genetic counselor. So I've been counseling patients in one way or another for over 10 years in mitochondrial disorders. And I'm also involved in several other projects regarding different types of disorders.
Great, fantastic. So Chris, maybe we'll stay with you. For some of the folks that may be watching this, listening to this, just generally describe the role of a study coordinator and how they help facilitate a clinical trial.
Okay, well, study coordinators wear a tremendous amount of hats. Some of the pre-trial work that we're involved with, or pre-study work that we are involved with, is just getting the study protocol going. And that is making sure either that we develop a study protocol or get one from a company and get it approved by our institution. So every protocol, every set of study procedures that we run is approved by a board at each of our universities that allows us to do the certain things that we do, all the procedures that we do. We're also involved in training to make sure that we're fully trained. And for many of us, it involves a lot of exams online, usually, to make sure that we know everything from how to treat patients appropriately, how to get consent, how to do all the study procedures and what's involved in that regarding risk to patients and regulatory issues, management of drug supplies, how to recruit patients, where to recruit patients. So it's really, anytime you meet with a study coordinator, they're extremely well versed in all aspects of the study.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, that's exactly why we wanted to involve this group in today's discussion. You work so closely with the patients and wear so many different hats. Jessica, could you maybe talk a little bit about sort of the administration of outcome measures, right? That's sort of a fundamental important part of the clinical trial. There have to be very clear endpoints established, with certain assessments. How does the study coordinator work with the patients on the actual administration of them?
Yeah, so it depends on the study, but in a lot of the mitochondrial disease studies, there's outcomes that might be related to functional testing, also often questionnaires. So whenever a new study gets going, all of the coordinators and other team members often get training on, if we're administering the tests, which we might be, or questionnaires on how we do that, if they're done by like a phone or iPad or computer or paper. In some of my studies, I have physical therapists who I work with who, record all of the outcome measures. I think that one thing that I'm not sure if everyone, I didn't certainly initially understand, was how specific all of the outcome measures are, the exact way that they're administered, the exact way the answers and results are recorded. It's extremely specific. That's why there's often a lot of direction given to patients in advance of visits, like wear certain outfits, bring certain mobility aids, rest beforehand, things like that, because those are really the main things the study is looking at.
Yeah, that would seem to be one of the big challenges, right, associated with your role, is just managing all these different components of it, the sort of the needs of the sponsor, the needs of the institution, obviously respecting the needs of the patient too. For the patients, what's the most important thing you can kind of convey to them in terms of how to give themselves the best chance of a successful visit and interacting with a study coordinator?
That's a hard question.
I
think having great communication between the coordinators and the patients is really important before you go to a visit. If you have any questions, if you're a parent or a patient who's unsure about even enrolling in a study, making sure you ask any questions you have. If you've been provided any forms to review them, ask any questions. to the coordinator, or they can escalate and ask the PI, have the PI check in with you? Or
Yeah, it really comes to communication, right? This very open communication taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Lilly, I know in your experience, you've had a chance to work with both pediatric patients as well as adults. Can you compare, contrast a little bit some of the differences as a study coordinator in trials that are designed for adults affected by mitochondrial disease versus children?
Sure. I think to compare the similarities, I think they're both incredibly difficult to navigate for the families and the caretakers. And I think that for the pediatric portion, I think, a lot of the times the children are happy to be there, happy to see us, and so are the adults. But I think that the adults, obviously have more of an awareness of what's going on, and they ask more questions, and they're just more thorough and want to understand the context of the trial a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But I think that both are, great participants, and I think that I think we have fun with both of them, and we just, for both parties, again, we tried really hard to be transparent about the trial progress, about everything that we are doing, and especially for the pediatric population, we try to communicate that with the parents mm-hmm. of the patients, just to ensure that they know exactly what is going on and what to expect.
Fair to say, though, each trial is unique, each cohort is unique, so you have to just take them one by one, case by case.
Right. And I think that mitochondrial disease has such an array of display of symptoms, and I think that it's just, everybody is their own individual patient, and that we just, treat them by definitely like an individualized case-by-case basis, and right. Every patient's needs are different, no matter if they're peds or adults. And so we try really our best really to cater to them.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to, Chris, turn back to you. I know you've been involved in trials that are really more of natural history studies, right, as opposed to treatment trials. You've been involved in trials that may involve like mitochondrial replacement therapy, very different from developing a specific treatment for an adult or a child affected by mitochondrial disease. Could you kind of talk about, again, comparing, contrasting, the interaction with patients in a natural history study versus in a treatment trial?
So natural history study does not include getting a study medication. So oftentimes patients are wondering, well, why should I be in a natural history study? Why should I travel to the site in New York City, get on a plane, take my time and effort to be in a natural history study, in which they may, if you look at it, you may not get any benefit at all. And that's something we commonly have to talk to, with patients, and what the real benefits of a natural history study are for them. And oftentimes it's just being with a group of people, the medical staff, that actually knows something about your disorder. So individuals come from all over the United States, and most of them do not have a mitochondrial specialist anywhere in their state or anywhere near them. So to be able to get paid, basically have their trip paid for and the hotel paid for, to come and speak with a medical specialist that knows something about mitochondrial disorders is really the thing that the staff gets out of it. And not only that, but also to have some sort of long-term commitment with that staff, that if a year from now and you're done participating in the natural history study, you have a question, that there's somebody that you can call and will be responsive. And if we as coordinators or associated medical staff don't know, we can find out from the PI. So I think it's immensely useful to be in a natural history study from a personal perspective, let alone what you're offering to the world of science.
Yeah, it's a very good point, right? This access to medical care, right, and being under the supervision of an experienced investigator in mitochondrial disease is one of the real benefits of participating in clinical research. And I think we've heard
Bill,
that from
I
some of
have,
our
I'm sorry.
patients.
I have patients that participated 5 years ago, and they still call me when something happens in their family.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah,
that just kind of shows the benefit, the long-term benefit of being with a medical team that knows something about mito disorders.
Yes, no doubt, a real connection. Hey, Jessica, so again, just knowing a little bit about your background, you've been involved in clinical trials, not just in mitochondrial disease, but other rare neurological or neurological, let's say, conditions. How do you kind of compare the challenge of coordinating a mitochondrial disease clinical trial with other conditions that you've been involved with?
Yeah, so I have several trials working with patients who are pediatric patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a progressive neuromuscular disease that's also quite rare, similar to mitochondrial disease. And it's pretty interesting to look at what goes on with that community. It's a community where there's a lot of patient advocacy groups that are extremely active, parent groups that are very active. So I think of that as a real great strength of, a community and a group when you're starting a trial or seeing if a trial is feasible at your center. It's great to know that there's groups that you can reach out to, like UMDF or NAMDAC for mitochondrial disease, where you could see, are there even enough patients with this disease in my area that this trial could be important or be possible. So I think following what Chris said, I think that's another benefit of being in a registry type, setup. I know when Lilly and I and other at UCSD, when we have a new trial that may be happening, we look through lists of people who may be in other registry studies, who may have been in natural history studies, to kind of pull from those. So both types of studies are looking at a small number of people overall. And the pediatric studies, you're working with the parents, of course, but every patient that enrolls is so important because it's often just, a really small number of patients that they need.
Yeah, so Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a really good example, though, of another rare neurological or neuromuscular condition for which there have been many trials and failures along the way, as well as successes. And, Lilly, I don't know if you can kind of speak to this, but to the patients that invest their time and the effort of being involved in a trial and traveling to it and moving through the study, and for all the effort you put into it, only to see maybe an outcome that isn't exactly what you hope for, and namely the approval of a drug. How do you balance the sort of the proper support, right, of the patient community to acknowledge this, but also help them to understand that future clinical research is going to depend upon them, and that's the only way we get to treatments and cures?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely disheartening, and for the team as well as the patients, we understand that it's very negatively affecting the patients, but we were also in their corner and rooting for them, and we also wanted to see the same exact results. And for all the works that our team has put in, or any team at any study site, of course we all share the same goal, and it's heartbreaking for us to have to deliver, those messages. But I just think that for the progress of science and moving forward, there's nothing that's wasted. There's no effort, there's no time. It's new discoveries, it's new ideas that's coming up from study designs, it's new improvements that we can learn from. And I think that moving forward, it only strengthens future clinical trial designs. And I think that's better for the medical community and for the patient population as well.
Sure. Yeah, so we're reaching the time soon here. I'd like to give each of you a chance to just share, what are the 2 or 3 things that you think would be most important for our community to implement, consider, to give mitochondrial disease and trials for mitochondrial disease an even better chance of success going forward. And Chris, I'm going to give you the hard position of going first with that one. I know it's very open-ended.
Yeah, I think one of the main, if you look at inclusion and exclusion study, and criteria in any study, one of the items is to have genetic testing. Being a genetic counselor, it's something that I see often where patients either have not had genetic testing or not really sure what their genetic testing means to know if they might be able to be in a particular study. So patients can find out about studies on clinicaltrials.gov, but one of the ways they find out about that is through their genetic testing, where maybe a study is only enrolling patients with a certain mutation or with mutations in a certain gene. So I think it's important as much as possible to get your genetic testing, to understand what it means, to ask the questions. Many of the coordinators will know information about the genetic test, or you might need to go to your neurologist or a geneticist or genetic counselor to get that information. But I think just being trial ready means having your genetic information available, having your medical records available, knowing what they mean, and asking the questions.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Trial ready, right? And I think UMDF views that as part of the responsibility we have, is to work with the community to be trial ready, to know who they are, where they are, and have them sufficiently characterized that when a sponsor comes with a particular asset that they think might have benefit to mitochondrial disease patients, we're trial ready. So I like that as a takeaway there. Lily, would you like to take that up, and any additional thoughts on how we improve things?
Sure. I think one of the most important things, I think, is for patients to realize that the medical community and the scientific community, we're all working hard. We're all working together for the same goal, and we want to bring you that goal. And I know that sometimes it might be upsetting that things don't work out, but if we just have patience and continue to, be along the journey, then I think that we'll, hopefully we'll get to that destination that we're all trying to reach.
Well, it is very much a team effort, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? It's the patients working with the study coordinators, working with the doctors, working with the patient advocacy groups, and all together to advance towards this ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Jessica, anything else you'd like to add that hasn't been covered?
Yeah, I think one thing, just kind of piggybacking off of what Lily said earlier about being in trials that might not have met the desired outcome, might not have led to a drug approval, is that it's really important, especially I think in the really rare diseases, to realize that pharmaceutical companies, industry sponsors are, taking a risk by starting any clinical trial, especially in a rare disease, and that just by having trials that have been completed that have shown that they're able to enroll patients in the rare disease trials is really powerful and important for future studies, that they can look back, even if a trial didn't lead to a certain drug getting approved, they can say, wow, that company was able to enroll X number of patients with this particular condition, which is rare, in this amount of time. Maybe that would be viable in terms of a, financial and, just pro-con analysis for a possible study. And I don't think patients always realize that when they're thinking about how they can contribute. I think even just screening for a study, even if you're not selected, you're not eligible, showing that there's enough people with that, again, particularly rare diseases, who are willing to participate in research is really helpful when you're thinking about the broader picture.
Well, it really supports Chris' statement, right, about being trial ready, right? Participate if it's, even if it's screening, and ultimately it's not something you in your specific situation can be a part of. You've learned from it. You've advanced science. Research advances on the shoulders of those, right, that went before it. So I think really important points there. Lots more we could talk about, again, with you three and all the experiences you've had, but we're going to have to wrap it up. So Jessica, Chris, Lilly, thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion.
You're welcome.
Yes.